The Lost Dutchman's Gold Mine, also known by similar names, is, according to legend, a rich gold mine hidden in the southwestern United States. It is believed to be located in the Superstition Mountains, near Apache Junction, east of Phoenix, Arizona. There are many stories about how to find the mine, and people search for it every year. Some have died in the search. The mine is named after German immigrant Jacob Walls, 1810 to 1891, who is said to have discovered it in the 19th century and kept its location a secret. The Lost Dutchman is perhaps the most famous lost mine in American history. Arizona toponymy expert Bird Granger wrote that by 1977, the story of the Lost Dutchman had been printed or cited at least 6 times more often than 2 other relatively well-known stories, the story of Captain Kidd's lost treasure and the story of the Lost Peg Leg Mine in California. People have been searching for the Lost Dutchman mine since at least 1892, with one estimate of 9,000 people a year attempting to find it. Former Arizona Attorney General Robert Corbin is among those who have searched for the mine. Robert Blair writes, "There were at least 4 legendary Lost Dutchman gold mines in the American West, including the famous Superstition Mine of Jacob Walls. One Lost Dutchman mine is said to be in Colorado, another in California, and 2 are in Arizona." Stories of these other Lost Dutchman mines can be traced back at least to 1870. The earliest Lost Dutchman mine in Arizona is said to have been near Wickenburg, about 110 miles (180 kilometers) northwest of the Superstition Mountains. A Dutchman was found dead in the desert near Wickenburg in 1870, along with saddlebags full of gold. Blair suggests that fragments of this legend may have been connected to the mythical Jacob Walls mine. Granger writes that fact and fiction are mixed in the stories, but that there are 3 main elements to the story. They are, first, stories of the lost gold of the Apaches or Dr. Thorne's mine, second, stories of the Lost Dutchman's mine, and third, stories of the lost gold vein of the soldiers, the most complete version of the story of the Lost Dutchman including all 3 legends. Blair argues that there is a grain of truth behind each of these 3 main stories, although the popular story is often greatly distorted from the actual story. Other theories have also emerged, suggesting that the mine is buried at the bottom of Apache or Roosevelt Lake. In 1977, Granger identified 62 variants of the story of the Lost Dutchman, some of the variations being minor but others substantial, which cast the story in a very different light from the other versions. In this story, actually 2 interconnected stories, members of the Apache tribe claim to own a very rich gold mine located in the Superstition Mountains. The famous Apache Geronimo is sometimes mentioned in connection with this story. In most versions of the story, the family of a man named Miguel Peralta discovers the mine and begins mining there, only to be attacked or massacred by Apaches around 1850 during the alleged Peralta massacre. Years later, a man named Dr. Thorne treats a sick or wounded Apache, often claimed to be a chief, and is rewarded with a trip to a rich gold mine. He is blindfolded and taken there by a circuitous route, allowed to take as much gold ore as he can carry before being escorted blindfolded from the site by the Apaches again. It is said that Thorne was either unwilling or unable to move the mine. Most likely, because Pedro de Peralta was the Spanish governor of New Mexico in the 17th century, his surname Peralta has inspired a number of legends in the American Southwest. James Reeves has attempted to argue that the Peralta family held a Spanish land grant and barony granted by the King of Spain, which included a large portion of Arizona and New Mexico, including the Superstition Mountains. The Peralta massacre is a legend according to which Apaches allegedly ambushed a mining expedition sent by the Peralta family into the mountains. Certain carved stones in the area are called Peralta stones, and the Spanish text and crude maps on them are considered by some to be clues to the location of a Peralta family gold mine in the Superstition Mountains, although others believe that the stones are modern forgeries. The lack of historical records leaves it unclear whether the Peralta family ever owned land or mines in or near the Superstition Mountains. Blair insisted that the Peralta part of the story was unreliable, writing, "The Peralta family's operation of a gold mine in Superstition is an invention of 20th-century writers. A man named Miguel Peralta and his family did indeed operate a successful mine in 1860, but near Valencia, California, not in Arizona. The mine was quite profitable, earning about $35,000 in less than a year." Blair described this as an unusually good return for such a small gold mine, earned in such a relatively short period. As of 1975, the ruins of the Peralta mine were still standing. However, the Peralta mine eventually became unprofitable, and when the money ran out, Miguel Peralta turned to fraud. Dr. George Wheeling, Jr. paid Peralta $20,000 for the rights to mine a vast tract of land, some 3 million acres, 12,000 square kilometers, in southern Arizona and New Mexico, based on a deed originally issued by the Spanish Empire in the 18th century. Problems arose when Wheeling discovered that the deed was a forgery. Despite his efforts, Wheeling was never able to get back the money he had given Peralta. This land grant was the basis for James Reeves' Arizona land scam. Reeves became a partner with Wheeling and continued to try to prove the authenticity of the land grant for years after his death. Blair claims that this story of Peralta, well known to Arizonans, was eventually incorporated into the Lost Dutchman story, in a heavily distorted version, following renewed interest in the Lost Dutchman mine in the 1930s. Because James Reeves, the Baron of Arizona, was convicted of fraud after the Peralta family genealogy and other documents supporting the farm title and barony relating to that land were determined to be forgeries. This also raises questions about the original purchase of the farm title by Dr. George Wheeling, Jr. The transaction occurred at a primitive campsite southeast of Prescott without the benefit of typical paperwork. Instead of a notarized deed, the transfer was recorded on a sheet of greasy camp paper with the signatures of several witnesses. Wheeling died in 1874 before a thorough investigation of the documents could be conducted or before he had the opportunity to be questioned on the witness stand, as Reeves later was. Another detail that casts doubt on the story is the fact that, according to Blair, there was never a Dr. Thorne serving in the military or even in the federal government in 1860. According to Blair, the origin of this story can be traced back to a physician named Thorne who was in private practice in New Mexico in 1860. Thorne claimed to have been captured by the Navajo in 1854 and that during his captivity he discovered a rich vein of gold. Thorne related his claims to 3 American soldiers around 1858. The 3 soldiers set out to search for the gold, but without success. Over the decades, this story gradually became absorbed into the story of the Lost Dutchman. This story involves 2 Germans, Jacob Walsh and Jacob Weiser. However, Blair argues that it is highly likely that there was never a second man named Weiser, but rather that one man named Walsh was transformed over the years into 2 men as the legend of the Dutchman's mine developed. Blair argues that this story can be divided into hawkish and dovey versions, depending on whether the German or Germans are said to have acted violently or peacefully. In most versions of the story, Jacob Walsh discovers a rich gold mine in the Superstition Mountains. In many versions of the story, they rescue or help a member of the Peralta family and are rewarded by being told the location of the mine. Walsh is attacked and wounded by marauding Apaches, but survives at least long enough to tell a man named Dr. Walker about the mine. It is also alleged that Walsh made a deathbed confession to Julia Thomas and drew or described a rough map of the gold mine. In his book The Dutchman's Lost Gold Edge, 1990, John Wilburn writes that the Bulldog Gold Mine near Goldfield, Arizona, fits very well with the description that Jacob Walsh gave as the location of his lost mine. Wilburn also states that geology shows that there is no gold in the Superstition Mountains, which are of igneous origin. In some versions, however, the mine is actually a cache placed there by Peralta. Another version of the story tells that 2 or more U.S. Army soldiers discovered a vein of nearly pure gold in or near the Superstition Mountains. The soldiers are said to have given away some of the gold, but were killed or disappeared soon after. This account is usually dated to around 1870. According to Blair, the story may have originated with the efforts of 3 U.S. soldiers to find gold in a region of New Mexico, based on a supposedly true story told to them by Dr. Thorne of New Mexico. Blair cites evidence for the historical Jacob Walsh and suggests that additional evidence supports the basic elements of the story, that Walsh claimed to have discovered, or at least heard the story of, the rich gold vein or cache. But Blair suggests that this basic story has been distorted in subsequent retellings, comparing the many variations of the Lost Dutchman story to the game of Chinese Whisper, where the original narrative has been distorted in multiple retellings of the tale. There was indeed a Jacob Walsh who immigrated to the United States from Germany. The earliest record of him in the United States is an 1848 declaration in which Walsh states that he was at about 38 years old. A man named Jacob Walsh was born in September 1810 in Württemberg. Blair suggests that this Walsh may be the same Walsh who later became the legendary Dutchman, and that he Americanized the spelling of his surname. Note that the tombstone shown gives a birth year of 1808. Walsh moved to Arizona in 1860 and remained in the territory for most of his life. He engaged in mining and prospecting, but he seems to have had little success with either. An alternative view, which better fits the legend of the lost mine, is that he periodically turned up with large quantities of gold. The Sterling Legend by Istikanatsa reports that Jacob Walsh sold gold to the United States Mint for $250,000 in 1880 and had $1,500 when he died in 1891. In the 1870s, Walsh owned a 160-acre estate near Phoenix, where he operated a farm. There is a theory that although Walsh never worked at Henry Wickenburg's Vulture Mine, which was notorious for its mismanagement, he may have been a fence for those who worked at Vulture. In 1891, there was a catastrophic flood in Phoenix, and the Walsh farm was one of many that were devastated. Walsh then became ill. It is rumored that he contracted pneumonia during the flood. He died on October 25, 1891, and was buried in Phoenix at what is now Pioneer and Soldiers Park. Blair had little doubt that Walsh had told Julia Thomas, an acquaintance of Walsh, the location of a supposed gold mine. As early as September 1, 1892, the Arizona Enterprise newspaper reported on the efforts of Thomas and several others to find the lost mine, the location of which had been told to her by Walsh. After this proved unsuccessful, it was reported that Thomas and her partners were selling maps of the mine for $7 each. If it weren't for the death of amateur explorer and treasure hunter Adolph Ruth, the story of the Lost Dutchman Mine would likely be little more than a footnote in Arizona history as one of hundreds of lost mines rumored to be located in the American West. Ruth disappeared while searching for the mine in the summer of 1931. His skull, with 2 holes identified as bullet holes, was discovered about 6 months after his disappearance, and the story became national news, sparking widespread interest in the Lost Dutchman Mine. In a story reminiscent of some of the earlier accounts, it is said that Ruth's son, Avin Ruth, learned of the Peralta mine from a man named Pedro Gonzalez. According to the story, around 1912, Avin Ruth provided legal assistance to Gonzalez, saving him from almost certain imprisonment. In gratitude, Gonzalez told Avin about the Peralta mine in the Superstition Mountains and gave him some antique maps of the site. Gonzalez claimed to be a descendant of the Peralta family on his mother's side and possibly knew the location of the Lost Dutchman Gold Mine. Avin passed the information on to his father, Adolf, who had a long-standing interest in lost mines and amateur exploration. Adolf Ruth had fallen and severely broken several bones while searching for the lost Peg Leg mine in California. He had metal pins in his leg and used a cane to walk. In June 1931, Ruth set out to find the lost Peralta mine. After traveling to the region, Ruth spent several days at Tex Barkley's ranch to outfit his expedition. Barkley repeatedly urged Ruth to abandon the mine search because the terrain in the Superstition Mountains was dangerous even for experienced outdoor enthusiasts, let alone for the 66-year-old Ruth in the heat of the Arizona summer. Ruth, however, ignored Barkley's advice and set off for a 2-week stay in the mountains. Ruth did not return as planned, and after a brief search, no trace of him was found. In December 1931, the Arizona Republic reported the recent discovery of a human skull in the Switcheroo Mountains. To determine whether the skull was Ruth's, it was examined by Dr. Ailes Herdlichka, a respected anthropologist, who was provided with several photographs of Ruth, along with Ruth's dental records. As Kurt Gentry wrote, Dr. Herdlichka identified the skull as that of Adolf Ruth. After examining the 2 holes in the skull, he stated that it appeared that a rifle or high-powered shotgun shell had been fired through the head at almost point-blank range, forming the small hole where the bullet entered and the large hole where it exited. In January 1932, human remains were discovered about 3/4 of a mile, 1.21 kilometers, from where the skull was found. Although the remains had been scattered by scavengers, they were undoubtedly Ruth's. Many of Ruth's personal belongings were found at the scene of the crime, including a pistol, with no missing rounds, and the metal pins used to stitch his broken bones together. But the map of the Peralta mine was reportedly missing. Fortunately, Adolf Ruth's checkbook was also found and turned out to contain a note written by Avin Ruth in which he claimed to have discovered the mine and given detailed directions. Avin Ruth ended his note with the phrase Vini, Vidi, Vici. Arizona authorities have not called a criminal investigation into Ruth's death. They have said that Ruth may have died of thirst or heart disease, although, as Gentry writes, one official went so far as to suggest that Adolf Ruth may have committed suicide. While this theory does not ignore the 2 holes in the skull, it fails to explain how Ruth was able to remove and bury the spent shell casing and then reload his gun after shooting himself in the head. Blair notes that the Arizona authorities' conclusion has been rejected by many, including Ruth's family and those who have clung to the more romantic story of a murder for the card. Blair writes that the national wire agencies picked up the story of Ruth's death and gave it more than it was worth, perhaps seeing the mysterious story as a welcome relief from the grim news coverage that otherwise characterized the Great Depression. Throughout the 20th century, various expeditions and individuals continued to search for the Lost Dutchman mine in Superstition. One of the most professional and serious efforts was led by Oklahoma City private investigator Glenn McGill, who organized numerous expeditions in the late 1960s and early 1970s and claimed at least twice to have identified the mine's location, but later admitted that he was either wrong or that the locations were made up or void of gold. McGill's adventures are described in the book The Killer Mountains by Kurt Gentry. One fact against the existence of the Lost Dutchman mine is that Walsh was a gold rod prospector. Although the gold coins he had were made of quartz, the Superstition Mountains are actually volcanic. Finally, the supposed mine directions that Ruth received are from a newspaper report from 1895. There have been several other deaths or disappearances in the Superstition Mountains since Ruth's death. Some of the mine prospectors have disappeared, possibly in wildlife accidents. In January 1933, a mine electrician named J.K. Tex Bradford of Globe, Arizona, set out to search for the Lost Dutchman mine. By October 1933, he had been missing for 9 months. In his 1945 book about the Lost Dutchman mine, The Gold of the Thunder God, Barry Storm, a pseudonym for John Griffith Clementson, claimed to have narrowly escaped a mysterious sniper whom he called Mr. X. Storm further suggested that Adolph Ruth may have been a victim of the same sniper. On July 3, 1947, James Cravey, 62, a retired photographer, was reported missing after he had hired a helicopter to drop him off in the Superstition Mountains on June 19, 1947, to search for the Lost Dutchman mine. Cravey said he would leave the mountains on foot on June 28, 1947. His decapitated remains were reportedly found in the Superstition Mountains in the mid-1940s. On November 9, 1949, prospector James Kidd went to work in the Superstition Mountains and never returned. He was never found. In February 1951, Oregon physician John Burns was found shot to death in the mountains. About a year later, in 1952, Joseph Kelly of Dayton, Ohio, disappeared. 2 years later, only his skull, which contained bullet wounds, was found. Charles Massey had come from nearby Tucson, accompanied by several friends, with plans to hunt in the mountains. While in the Superstition, he became separated from the main group and was never seen alive again. On February 24, 1955, his skeleton was found. Massey had been shot directly between the eyes. A short year later, the body of Martin Z. Watto of Brooklyn, New York, was found with a bullet hole in his head. On March 21, 1961, the body of Walter Maury of Denver, Colorado, was removed from his resting place near Weaver's Needle. A jury ruled that his death was caused by a gunshot wound inflicted by an unknown person or persons. The fully clothed skeleton of Charles Bowen, a Salt Lake City man, was also found that same year. Although he was buried in a shallow sandy grave with a bullet hole in his back, his death was officially ruled a suicide. In June 1961, J. Clapp, a peaceful hermit who lived in a cave in Superstition, disappeared. Clapp's decapitated skeleton was found about 3 years later, but the cause of death is still unknown. The unidentified skeletal remains of John Doe of Apache Junction were discovered on November 23, 1969. He was found with a gunshot wound to the temple. On January 28, 1981, Susan Rossetti was abducted by two men, Jess James Gillis and Michael Logan, and taken to Fish Creek Hill in the Superstition Mountains, where she was pushed off a 40-foot cliff. Despite her pleas to be allowed to die in peace, her killers descended, beat her up, and buried her alive with rocks. Gillis was executed on January 13, 1999, while Logan was sentenced to life in prison. On May 4, 1984, the body of Walt Gassler, a prospector who had searched for, and claimed to have found, the Lost Dutchman, was discovered by ranch hand Don Shade. An autopsy showed signs of a heart attack, and his backpack contained gold ore that was said to be identical to that found by Jacob Walls. Due to his failing health, Walt had previously contacted two other prospectors, one of whom was Bob Corbin, the Arizona Attorney General. A few months later, he told Bob's partner and local historian, Tom Colenborn, that he had found the Lost Dutchman mine. He disappeared the next day after being abandoned on a local trail by his wife. A month after his death, Tom was approached by someone who falsely claimed to be Walt's son, Roland. The man showed him gold similar to that allegedly found at the Dutchman mine and asked Tom for the map and notes to retrace his father's steps. Tom gave him a manuscript and a backpack. Months later, Tom was giving a lecture when he was approached by the real Roland Gassler, who provided him with his identification. Furthermore, according to the ranch hand and the sheriff's report, this Roland claimed he never received the backpack found on his father's body. In 1992, a white man between the ages of 30 and 40 was found dead in the Superstition Mountains, killed by 2 gunshot wounds to the back of the head. His identity remains unknown. On July 11, 2010, Utah hikers Curtis Merworth, Ardeen Charles, and Malcolm Meeks disappeared in the Superstition Mountains while searching for a mine. Merworth had gotten lost in the same area in 2009, prompting a rescue operation. On July 19, the Maricopa County Sheriff's Department called off the search for the missing men. It is believed they died in the summer heat. In January 2011, 3 remains believed to be those of the missing men were found. On August 12, 2020, local artist Hyman Welsh was last seen walking southeast from the parking lot at Weaver's Needle Vista near State Road 88 in the Tonto National Forest. He was working with his uncle, Brian Welsh, that day, and on their way back, the two stopped at Weaver's Needle Vista. After telling his uncle that he wanted a better view of the sunset, Hyman walked southeast from the parking lot toward Weaver's Needle. He was not found. Despite numerous mysterious deaths and mysterious disappearances of prospectors, the Lost Dutchman Gold Mine continues to be searched for in Arizona to this day. Whether it will ever be discovered, only time will tell. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the Golden Treasure channel. Stay tuned for new updates and give the video a thumbs up in support.